Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever you're watching or listening to this, and welcome to Link Up Leaders, your direct link to leaders in supply chain and e-commerce. My name is Lisa Kinski. I'm your producer and co-host, and joined as always by Francois Jeffrey. Francois, how are you today?
I am great. How are you?
Good. That's not your usual Pittsburgh recording corner.
It is not. So I drove to Virginia late last night because I'm celebrating. Yeah, I'm celebrating Thanksgiving with my mom and nieces and nephews tonight.
It's early.
Very early, but the next few weeks are super busy. So like next week I will be back in Atlanta.
Right.
The week after that, there's a wedding in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
And then it's Thanksgiving. And so we are going to celebrate it here with my family. And then we're going to celebrate it with Kate's family in Jersey on Thanksgiving itself.
Gotcha.
So it's a busy month.
Oh, fun. So wait, so are you at your mom's new townhouse then?
No, I'm at my buddy's house here in Lorton. It's like 20-30 minutes away.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, are we going to see any dogs? Are there any cute interruptions that might happen?
They do have a rescue, actually, but he will probably not be joining us. He loves to stick with them. And he has, I wish I could show him. He's adorable. He has 2 different colored eyes, and he's one of the sweetest dogs ever.
Is he an Aussie baby with the 2 different colored eyes? Is he an Australian cattle dog?
I don't think so. I don't know. You'll have to check out. I'll send you a picture later.
Okay, cool.
I'm the worst with, if they're not a German Shepherd or like a Chihuahua or like a Shar-Pei, like something very obvious. I have no clue. Like I know the basics of the basics. But how are you doing? How's everything in Atlanta?
I'm good. Everything's good. It's cold. Colder than I would like. You probably would be thrilled to be here right now.
It is very nice and chilly here right now. It's probably about 50 degrees, and I'm happy.
I don't know what it is outside right now. All I know is I walked into the office, turned up that thermostat, and turned on my little space heater, and I'm all cozy.
Yeah.
But no, it's good. Just staying busy, kind of still working on catching up after, powwow. And
Yes.
I'm seeing all the people who are still running around. So like Amy Weiss is in New York, or is going to be in New York doing yet another event. I think she went to Texas. Now she's going to be in New York. And it's just so cool to have actually met so many awesome people that we've been talking to for so long. And hopefully, if it works out, we're both going to meet our guest today because she's doing a little travel around the world, it seems like.
Yeah.
Going to a couple places.
It's funny because everyone that we talked to, and we took, we obviously made some content when we were in Miami also. And all the Amazon sellers that we talked to, the number one thing to even ask them to get on camera if they can answer one question. It's like, what's the biggest struggle that you encountered over the past 12 to 18 months across the board, whether it's like logistics or manufacturing? It was supply chain. So I'm very excited to actually talk about this. What some people consider might be a boring conversation, but when you think about it, is a beautiful art. It's almost like music. Everything has to come together. It has to be composed.
It's so funny. That's the second time you've said that on the podcast.
Yeah. I think it is.
I know
Everything
you do.
has to work in symphony in order for it to all work. I mean, if you have, the only other type of music I could think of where that isn't necessarily the case is like jazz, and still even that, everything has to come together to actually work and be a good sound at the end of the day. I don't know. When I think of supply chain, it's
a pleasant auditory experience.
Yes, pleasant auditory experience. In this case, it is a pleasant business experience, and it's the foundation to every business, especially those in e-commerce.
Well, let's go ahead and just dive straight in then and speak with a fellow supply chain enthusiast. We have Dyci Sfregola with us. Dyci, how are you doing?
Hello.
Did I pronounce your last name correctly? Sfregola?
No.
Oh, no. How do you pronounce it?
It's Sfregola.
Oh, okay. Sfregola.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sfregola. You have to roll the R and pronounce all 3 consonants. It's beautiful. A lot.
That might be
I
one of the
love it.
fanciest last names I've ever heard, to be
Thank
honest.
you.
I thought
Yeah, I mean,
thought
it's
my
not
name was
mine.
fancy.
I acquired it, so I can't, take
You got to
credit
take some
for it.
credit. The way you
Yeah.
even say it is very elegant. I mean, I think it's people sometimes they see my name, for example, they're like, and they see me, they're like, you are Francisco. I'm like, I am not Francisco, I'm Francois. And the C comes before the O.
Yes.
So it's names are an interesting thing. But I mean, it really ties everyone together. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's just sounds that we put together to call to refer to each other. And that we
Yeah, that's
actually
true.
will respond
I
to.
remember reading or maybe learning. This was so long ago. I don't know why this stuck with me, but I don't know how true it is also. But the concept of last names was originally like your profession, like
Yes.
centuries ago.
Oh,
So
Yeah,
like a Smith
that's-
was like they were probably a blacksmith, or like Taylor as a last name, like they were the Taylor
I
of
did
the
not know
town.
that.
So
Interesting.
I mean, I don't know how true that is. But
No,
that's
I've
We're
definitely
spreading
heard that
rumors
too.
on this podcast.
yeah.
Wouldn't be the first time.
You didn't
No,
hear
I've
it
heard
from
that too,
me, but and also, Lisa, if you want a cute distraction, I can definitely have my toddler come in.
100%. We welcome the cute distractions. That's something that
I
has been so much
did make
fun.
an announcement to the household to try to keep him quiet and away from here for at least the next hour. That doesn't always happen, but you know,
He popped in. Well, we saw you initially.
Yeah.
I think it was Ryan Kramer's show, right? It was
Yes.
Crossover Commerce, which is an
Mhm.
amazing show. Ryan has amazing content coming out and talking to amazing people. And that's why we asked you, and we're delighted to have you on this show. But I saw him pop in, and that was one of the most adorable things. So yes, if he does pop in, please introduce him to the world.
I was just thinking, is he bathed though? Like if he does pop up, will I look like a bad parent?
They're kids.
Absolutely not. Well, Dyci, thank you so much for being here. Would you please walk us through your professional background and kind of how you got to the supply chain world, and tell us a little bit about NewGen?
Oh my goodness. I will keep it very short, like Cliff Notes version, because I am a generalist, which means I have done a lot
Okay.
on my journey to figure out what I actually like. So I know that there is always this idea of like, find your passion, do what you're passionate about. And in my quest to figure out what that is, I spent time in several different industries doing different jobs. But in 2016, 2015, 2016, I had a contract with Jaguar Land Rover as a product specialist. And I was at a point in my life to where I had spent maybe 5 or 6 years just kind of, you know, gallivanting around Europe and doing some nonprofit work and doing some contract work here and there, like anything to not have a real job that would tie me down and make me request time off and, you know, sit in an office and things like that. So I was at the LA Auto Show talking to one of the engineers for the new Jaguar F-Pace that was coming out that year. And he was telling me about all this cool stuff that the engineers were doing with what do you call it? Like the heart monitor on the steering wheel, and just a lot of cool features that were for the good of humanity and not just to sell cars and make a lot of money. So I thought, okay, that's cool. That's a job with purpose. And I just, in doing some research, realized, okay, I want to go into engineering. There are a lot of different paths I can take to have a purpose-driven career. So let's do a career move and go into engineering. So I settled on industrial engineering, which my stepmom said was the non-engineering of engineering. It's it's just what you can like get by to say that you studied engineering, but you're not really an engineer. But I went back to school. I got a scholarship to go to Kennesaw State in Atlanta, and I really wanted to go to Georgia Tech, but I was at a non-traditional student space in life where my husband and I had just moved back from Italy. He didn't speak any English. We were still waiting on his official green card. So like he couldn't drive. He didn't know anyone. And I needed to work because he couldn't work yet. So I couldn't go to school at that traditional, undergraduate time because I was going back to get another undergraduate degree. I had to start all the way over. In my first degree, I didn't do Chem 101 and physics and statics and all the stuff you have to do for engineering. So I had to start back over from scratch with another bachelor's degree. So I couldn't go to class from 10 to 10:50 and then from like 12:15 to 1:15 or whatever, that traditional undergraduate schedule is. So I ended up going to KSU so I could take classes in the evenings and I could do more online courses. And I fell into a role for a account executive for a 3PL that worked with small and medium businesses. So that was my first kind of taste of logistics and distribution and understanding freight and LTL and intermodal and, all of those different things. And as I started to take more courses on the business side of industrial engineering, you get into accounting and, technical communication and things like that. I realized I really did like that intersection of business and engineering and processes and things like that. And I had a course where I don't know if this was intentional, but it was very supply chain career focused. And it wasn't titled supply chain. I think it was very much an introduction course for industrial engineering. So I expected there to be more engineering focus or at least like other business concepts, but it was only supply chain. We only talked about supply chain and logistics. And I just it sounded really interesting. It was something I had never heard about. And working in logistics, I was able to kind of conceptually connect the dots to understand what a career would look like. And I landed an internship at a consulting firm that did supply chain planning, Barkowie Management Consultants, who was later acquired by Genpact. But they did supply chain tool implementations, cloud-based implementations. And that was, I guess, kind of all she wrote, or the rest is history, or whatever they say. Like since 2017, that's the space that I've been in, and I've just really, really enjoyed it. I mean, you guys know it's very interesting. It's never boring. Always something new to learn. There's so many different aspects of supply chain and product operations that you can always continue to learn. So for someone who is passionately curious about a lot of things and just enjoys learning, it's a really good, industry and career space to be in.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And I know Francois was already excited to talk to you after he saw your appearance on Ryan's podcast, but then I think he learned, I usually find the guests and stuff, and he's like, okay, cool. He also then learned that you did industrial engineering, which is what he did too. And he was like, this is happening.
Well, it's funny because I think so many industrial engineering programs, from what I saw, I also graduated industrial engineering from West Virginia University, and it was also a heavy focus in supply chain and supply chain management, which is just essentially the business side of supply chain. And you understand some of the mechanics, right? You understand the manufacturing aspects, the logistics, the warehousing, even where to select warehousing. As opposed to like selecting something in the middle of the state because you think it's good. Like, well, let's consider, the ports and the transportation costs and the lead times that actually go into all this. So you get to learn the nitty gritty. I mean, I think that's something, if they had like a crash course for supply chain management in industrial engineering and someone can take that, and they're in e-commerce, they 100% should, even if they're not managing the operations. You just
Oh,
will be able to
yeah,
learn
I completely
so
agree.
much.
There are a lot of business concepts that we covered. And I ended up getting a master's in engineering management. And I went back and forth between MBA with like a supply chain focus or engineering management. And I really liked the engineering management piece because I do think that you are, I don't want to say you're taught, because it's maybe a little bit also of just kind of natural,
Mhm.
your natural personality goes this way. But I think that it is developed more when you take those types of courses, because there are a lot of things that I remember thinking, oh, well, like that's common sense. Like obviously, like, obviously you would go through the process of thinking about that. But now that I'm in business, that's not always the case. There are a lot of gut decisions that are not then justified or quantified in this way that engineers are taught to think, very process
Mm.
oriented, very numbers driven. I think that maybe like if you're in finance, accounting, like you do numbers. So in that aspect, maybe they are an exception, team members in that department. But when I sit down and we talk to a lot of like CEOs or, VP of operations, those kind of guys, I find myself thinking very often, like, yeah, it seems like it might be the right thing, but did you actually, do some type of analysis to make sure
Right.
that like your gut was correct? Because sometimes our gut is right. But a lot of times, if you think about like the total cost of ownership or like the useful life of something, like how much you actually going to get out of it, it doesn't really make sense. And it is something that's hard to, I want to say hard. It is time consuming sometimes to calculate, especially if you are, a new business and you don't have a lot of these tools that can do that calculation for you. I know Tools Group recently came out with a new functionality in their tool that I was looking at this past week, and it is basically that sanity check to say this volume discount seems like it would be a good idea, but let's
Mhm.
actually look at your demand. When would you actually use it? When should you make the purchase? Is that time frame within whenever this promotion is going to expire, et cetera, et cetera? It does all this calculation for you to say, no, it sounds like a good deal, but it's really not in your particular case right this second. Or yes, it is a good deal and you should make the order on this date in order to satisfy the rest of your demand, not exceed holding cost, inventory, et cetera, et cetera. But everyone can't afford, that we work with a lot of clients who can't afford, that level of tool set. So to have that engineering background and thought process to be able to say, okay, how can I most quickly calculate something that is at least directionally correct?
Mhm.
Because it's never going to be absolutely correct because you can't see the future. Like
Mhm.
everyone knows your forecast is going to be wrong, unless like it's this fluke and or maybe you have a customer. And I will even stop myself from saying, even if you have a customer that orders every single week the same thing every single time, there's still a possibility that they're not actually this week going to make that order. You know what I mean? You never know what's going to happen on their end. But your forecast is like always going to be wrong. So you have to also think about how much time is it worth spending to try to get like so close to this calculation that, if it's directionally correct, you just need to be in the right direction, because you can't, especially now, you don't know what's going to happen. No one knows what's going to happen these days.
Yeah, I think the pandemic really taught us all
Yeah.
that, that no one actually knows. Well, and I think the exposure to even the thought process is important. And Gina Wickman has a series of books, and I'm glad that you brought up that CEOs sometimes don't have maybe not necessarily the tool set, but also just the time. And a lot of times they are visionaries, right? They say, "Hey, I want to build this type of brand," but they might not think of, well, these are the types of products and this is the value add to those products, but how are they actually made? How long is that actually going to take? Something that seems so simple, especially when we're in the sourcing side and we have these conversations, they think it's sometimes as simple as just, well, don't you just glue that piece? Or, well, can you just make the plastic a little bit longer? But without thinking about, well, what about the tooling and the molding costs? How long are those going to take to develop? And I think that's why I just really think there should be, and maybe you might know of one, but a crash course in industrial engineering supply chain would be vital to all of these visionaries and CEOs and brands and executives to just have some level of exposure of just like, oh, okay, there's a little bit more that goes into let's make a product, ship it, and sell it.
Right.
There's a lot of steps that go in between that. But I was talking to Norm yesterday in a clubhouse. We were talking about logistics, and there was an interesting question. I'd love to get your definition on this, but how would you define supply chain?
I define supply chain very differently than what a lot of people that I even communicate with regularly define supply chain. So it's a really good question because it is important to like be talking on the same page. Oh, there he is. Abby se fue al baño, fuerza, tal vez. Okay, tengo que hablar un poquito. He's here. I'll show him just because this is his third costume change today. So,
oh my goodness,
he is adorable.
He started as Jack Skellington.
Good choice.
Then I saw him and he was Ghostbusters, and now I see him and he's incredible.
Solid choices.
Great movie, also.
Mi amor, tengo que trabajar. No, mi amor. Okay. Puedes quedarte aquí, pero en silencio, ¿ok? No, nada de nena. Ale, ¿puedes ir con Abby? Hey. But Ale, no. Vete con Abby. Vete con Abby, mi amor. Sí. Vete con Abby, mi amor, y después vengo a hablar contigo. Okay. So when we talk about supply chain, we do have to make sure that we're on the same page because to your point, when I think about supply chain, I'm thinking about literally anything that affects the customer getting an end product and sending that end product back to the customer. So that's product development, innovation, thinking about what's going to be the new product line, product design, packaging, distribution. There is kind of the framework of the innovate, source, make, return, deliver. That like anything that involves any of those business functions, in my mind, is supply chain. And I really like that in the last year and a half or so, I've started to see a lot more people talking about the supply network because for some, like chain is just like, okay, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, but that's not how your supply chain works.
Yeah.
It's a network
That's a very rudimentary
of pieces that makes things happen. And I read an article that one of our directors shared with us a couple of weeks ago, or maybe it was a couple of months now, Groundhog Day, COVID Groundhog Day. It's every day is the same day. But from the, like an e-commerce startup, small company paradigm, that supply chain, it is really synonymous with product operations. So anything that is related to that product. So financials, distribution, fulfillment, warehouse, demand planning, inventory management, like all of it, procurement, sourcing, all of it. So I always say that if you are in business and you have a product, then you are in supply chain, like you have a supply chain business. But that is something that I think is very like, amen, hallelujah, kind of preaching, preachy. And I don't know if everyone would, agree with me, but I mean, just from the work that we do at Nugent Architects, like we never get into the symptom that we're called in to help with and don't end up talking about literally every single thing else in the company, like the IT, human capital, organization structure, the culture of the company, like everything touches your supply chain. And there was a quote, I don't remember where I heard it now or read it, but it's always stuck with me in that all business decisions manifest themselves in the supply chain. So any business decision you make, it will show up either negatively or positively in your supply chain and product operations.
Yeah. And that's one reason that I always wonder why one of the first hires in particularly e-commerce first companies is not in the supply chain space. From what I see, it tends to be in either marketing or product development or just one minor aspect that does touch on the supply chain.
Sales.
Marketing, or sales, right? It's like, well, what are you even going to sell if you don't have any product?
Or if you do sell it, how are you going to fulfill orders? How are you going to execute on the demand? I haven't been in this space long enough to know why that's not the case. But it's very interesting from my perspective also, because let's think about companies who aren't, product-based companies, from like, you don't have a physical product. Maybe it's, software or, or something like that. But it's universal in that even if you have a software and you have salespeople and they're going out and they're selling, but you don't have an implementation framework or people who can implement this software, you're only going to get so far. Your salesperson can go out all day and sell, but then if you have to tell the customer, actually, we're not available to implement our software, or actually, we can't fulfill that order, then, what sense does it even make? Does it even matter? So I too, just in the past year, have also it's always bewildered me that, people have VP of go-to-market and VP of sales, and they have this whole marketing structure and, all of this, publicity and advertisements going out. But then when I say, oh, like, who's your COO, or, who's your VP of operations, or who's heading up, product operations or supply chain. And it's, sometimes maybe someone who, especially like in, startup, small company space, it's someone who was maybe doing customer service before, and they like fell into having to also do sourcing and purchasing, but really have no idea what it means. Right. And sometimes it's also the case to where companies have outsourced it. So if I have a fulfillment partner, or have a packaging partner, or have a manufacturer, then I lean on that, kind of core partner to say, oh yeah, I know someone who can also do the packaging. We'll call them up and we'll let you know what the price is. Or I know someone who can also do the distribution. I'll call them up and, and we'll let you know what the price is. But a lot of times those companies don't really have true expertise because they're the manufacturer, or they're the distributor, or they're the fulfillment warehouse. So then if you need them to do something else, it's like, yeah, they can do it because they know someone, but is that the best course of action for your industry vertical? Thinking about what your customers actually want, something else that you learn in industrial engineering, the voice of the customer. Right. Is their packaging reflective of what your customer expects? is their technology up to speed or up to a point to where they're going to be able to give the automated notifications that your customer wants? And you really need someone in-house, again, product operations, VP of like whatever you want to call it, but that understand the value of the supply chain from a revenue generation perspective and not just as a cost. Because that's another thing. So when I talked about like cultural changes, it's a cultural shift for an organization and a paradigm shift to now look at the supply chain and product operations as a revenue generator, as opposed to like, oh, we have these freight costs that we have to pay for. They're so high. Oh my goodness, they're going up again. So one of the first things that we do when we go into a company, we say, is your supply chain a cost center or a revenue center? Because just that answer tells a lot about what we are going to be facing and the conversations and the angle and perspective of the conversations that we're going to have going forward. So, I mean, obviously, as you can imagine, we always say drive it toward a revenue center and think about it as a revenue center, because when you think about it as a revenue center, the company is, and the leadership, shareholders, the board, whoever it is making the big decisions and writing the big checks, they are okay with paying a really good salary to the person that's going to head up supply chain. And they're okay making those technology investments because they recognize the value add and the ability to gain more market share, to increase the customer base, to keep current customers coming back because they have a good experience. So it's just really important to invest in that person in-house. And I think that, and I know I said like 5 minutes, but I don't know why people don't, but I think it's really just, it's an education thing, in that because supply chain and logistics and freight, et cetera, has always just been this really expensive line item on the P&L, that it's always been a cost center. So now there's an opportunity. And I say now because like I've been here for not 20 years. I don't know, maybe other people have been talking about this for 20 years. But it's now there's an opportunity to start to educate, especially in the e-commerce space, of why you should invest in supply chain and product operations in order to scale up your business, to grow your business, to gain market share, to kind of meet that new level. You have to get that person. You have to get that person on staff and to get someone that knows what they're doing, and is keeping up to date with all of the different changes in the market. I mean, especially in the e-commerce space, things are changing so quickly. There are new technologies, there are new consumer expectations, geopolitical issues really affect e-commerce, subscriptions. That's what I was talking about with Ryan. Like there are just so many different angles, and as things start to open back up, if you had a lot of really good, an increase in demand, a lot of revenue while everything was closed, people are now wanting to get out of the house. And a lot of companies are trying to understand, okay, how do I now augment this really good e-commerce experience with an in-person retail experience? A lot of stores are going toward experience centers and not necessarily, come buy here instead of buying online. What does that mean for inventory? Things like that. So it's a critical hire and it's a critical investment. And I think it's just a matter of educating business owners and executive leadership on the value add of supply chain and product operations.
And so let's say a company, and particularly those that are scaling up in the e-commerce realm, they've built a great brand. I think if you built a great brand 2-3 years ago and you were effectively able to manage supply chain today over the past 12 to 18 months, you're doing something right. But there's always something more that you can do, particularly in the e-commerce space. How would you suggest that they start to audit their supply chain? Like, what are the first things that they should be looking at even if they don't have time, if they don't maybe have the resources to hire out a supply chain expert or contract you, for example, to come in, how do they look at their supply chain? What should they be looking at?
Do I have to give a really like simple answer?
No, I mean, we have time.
No.
We could dive into, it's a complex question.
Yeah, we actually have a tool that we developed. No, we're not that fancy. We don't have a tool we developed. We have a couple of maturity tools that we like to use. One of them is the ASCM supply chain resiliency tool. And if you are a member, I think it's a really good tool. It's like an Excel macro enabled, very simple. Membership is not $15,000 a year. You know, like I am the CEO of a small business, so I'm very well aware of, you know, optimizing what you actually spend and making sure that you're going to get value out of it. So one of the ciao, mi amor. so one of the things that I really like about this tool is that it has a lot of benchmarks in it and a lot of KPIs. So a lot of companies that we talk to when they're like, okay, you know, to your question, what should I be looking at? I think that is a really good place to start. Of course, there are the standard, you know, supply chain KPIs that are definitely relevant to e-commerce. So, you know, on time and full, order fulfillment rate, cycle time, days of supply or weeks of supply, however quickly, you know, your organization moves. But that tool, the ASCM supply chain resiliency benchmarking tool, is really great. It is something that is not very expensive. You don't require a lot of technology. You only have to have Excel. And what it does is what the macros do is to keep track of everyone who has ever used it and put in their information. So in addition to knowing where you are as a company and developing a baseline, you can also benchmark that against other companies that have also completed the tool. So that's what I really like about it, because otherwise, if you want to get benchmarking information, sometimes you have to buy into a really expensive, you know, subscription service or, you know, something like that. But we always start there. So when we do like a discovery assessment, we always encourage that companies start there with just basics. And then with the oh my goodness, I lost my train of thought. So I was talking about, process. And then also to make sure that you just know who all of the actors are in your order to cash and procure to pay. Those two are like the most critical processes. And a lot of times, most times, people don't actually know what's happening. Like they know that they purchase product, and then that they eventually get a bill and they pay for it. They know that a customer goes to their website and they make an order, and then eventually they get some, you know, money revenue for it. But they don't really know what truly happens in between those steps, in between the first step, in between the last step, and then who is doing everything. So who is taking the first piece of information, doing something with it, getting an output, and then sending it downstream. So those two processes, I don't think that it is something that is time consuming. I know time consuming is relative. You know, if I say it's only going to take you 8 hours and you're like, oh, I'm working 70-hour weeks, I don't have 8 hours. You know what I mean? So it's not time consuming if you think about something that's going to take weeks to do. I mean, you don't have to spend weeks really figuring out what your order to cash and procure to pay process looks like. But with those two processes being well documented and well understood by everyone in the organization, along with the KPIs that you get in that ASCM benchmarking tool. Again, cycle time, order to cash, days of supply, order to cash, OTIF, days of supply on hand. Those are, my gut is telling me to say forecast accuracy, but I don't want to say forecast accuracy, because then people think like, oh, I forecasted 50 and it was really 20. But in my mind, that's less important than, okay, you forecasted 50, but you only had 20 orders. How well did you execute on those 20 orders? Did people get all of the line items in those 20 orders? Were people satisfied with the order? What about the quality of the actual product? That's something that I think a lot of e-commerce companies who are doing very well and are growing, they're getting data back from their customers about the quality of the product. And they're actually doing something with that data. So we've worked with a couple of subscription companies and, e-commerce retail companies. And that is one thing that I found that they do really well. I don't really know what to call that KPI, but the actual process of getting customer feedback. I know when I go on and I make an order online and someone or the company then sends me tell us how we did, or what did you like about this item? Why are you returning this item? I always fill it out, because I hope that if they're asking, they're actually doing something with that data and they are able to determine the success rate of that product. And in doing so, change inventory allocations, or if they have to change suppliers, maybe it's a quality issue with the supplier, or, it's information to provide to purchasing and to buyers to say like, hey, this didn't sell well because of XYZ. Because you're not always going to make everyone happy, but customer recovery and being able to then provide something that does meet the customer's expectations is what really makes the difference.
Yeah, I love that you call it baselines, because I think a lot of times when you don't see it as a value add, or supply chain isn't a revenue driver in your company, you don't necessarily create those baselines. That, and I think we have these conversations a lot where someone typically in a perfect world takes 30 days to produce a product, takes 3 weeks to ship it, takes a week for it to check into Amazon. Well, what's going on with Shopify? What happens if something is delayed? How do you properly forecast those? And my question really is like, how do they tie in marketing efforts into some of these forecasts? And how do they have those teams really talk when it comes to supply chain and marketing even?
That's a really good question. And it made me think about something that I didn't mention, which is really, really important when you asked, what does someone need to know about their supply chain? Lead times. Lead times are very, very important, because now if I'm going to have a conversation with marketing and I need to be able to tell marketing, or marketing is going to tell me, hey, in March, we want to do this promotion, or for the holidays, we want to do this promotion. Well, depending on what month we're in or what week we're in, and I know what my lead times are, I'm going to tell marketing that can't happen, which is why it's so critical, like you said, Francois, for there to be, even if it's like a makeshift, very basic sales and operations planning process, S&OP, even if you don't call it S&OP and it's not a real S&OP process, but there's some cadence to where sales and marketing, it's talking with supply chain, manufacturing, production, warehousing, whatever that looks like. But there has to be a sharing of information, and there has to be this circular planning process to where sales and marketing says, these are our ideas for the upcoming whatever time, insert time horizon here, 6 months, 6 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever it is. And then that gives manufacturing, production, warehousing, all of operations, that gives them the opportunity to be able to say, yes, we can do that, or no, we can't do that. And a lot of times when you see stockouts, or when you have issues with executing on the demand plan, is because those conversations did not happen. No one from marketing or sales shared what the pipeline looked like. No one shared what the promotions were going to be and on which products, or they shared them when it was too late. Because again, if you know how long your lead time is, you can tell the marketing side of the organization, if you're going to put a product on promotion, we need to know at least X number of days, weeks, months in advance, because that's how long it takes to procure product. And that's how long it takes to get it, not only to procure it, to get it, to the port and to get it in the warehouse, but then also the put away time for it to actually be available to be picked by someone in the warehouse and for that order to be fulfilled. So a lot of it is process and communication. And whenever I speak with companies and they say, yeah, DC, we really want your team to help us tell us what the right thing is to do, and if we are doing it the right way. And like actual studies have shown, McKinsey, like there are studies that you can look at that show there is no right way to do it. If everyone knows what's happening, yeah, there's a best way, but sometimes a lot of companies find themselves between a rock and a hard place. The best way to do something is to have POS data and to have customer data. But in certain industries, you have to pay for that. And it's very, very expensive. And if you are a startup, you have to be very vigilant and about what you're spending. And if it comes down to, do I spend for this really important thing or this other really important thing, then a lot of times what is not so important is POS data. So, and that could go either way. It could be fulfillment, or it could be some, piece of technology or something like that. But that's not what really makes the difference. What those studies found is that what really makes the difference is people's understanding of the process and understanding why what they do is important to the cog and the rest of the wheel, and how it affects the next person. So if marketing has a really good understanding of the order to cash, procure to pay process, and they understand how what they do affects everything when it comes to actually fulfilling orders and keeping things in stock, and not overstocking, not understocking, how that affects the bottom line of the company. If everyone's on the same page, you're more likely to get a positive result, as opposed to marketing knowing that marketing knows that they have to drive customers to our website and those customers are going to buy stuff. But if those customers can't buy the stuff they want to buy, then it's a really bad look. In the beginning, I know a lot of people, I see a lot of ads on Instagram for, new e-commerce companies popping up.
Oh yeah.
The pants that sold out in 2 hours, or whatever it is. We were out of stock right away. And it's yeah, that's a cool story. In the beginning, it's not a cool story though. Once you have a faithful customer base and every time they go to order something, everything's always out of stock. And when back in stock soon is 3 months or 6 weeks. And that's, for me, is not soon. I actually, about a week ago did notify me when this thing is back in stock. And now that a week has passed, I'm okay, I don't care anymore. I'm going to go somewhere else. I'm now going to look for this product, a comparable product at another company. So that's a lost sale. So it's at that point, it's not cool to say, oh, we stocked out. At that point, you have a supply chain problem.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's so much to digest. especially from like a business owner perspective, I think it's hard to navigate the waters between marketing, sales, operations, and you might lump supply chain into operations, but also finance. Um, are there any, I guess, effective just basic strategies that a executive or leadership can start to implement to get these teams to work together? Like, I would imagine having them just sit in on the same meetings whenever they're talking about supply chain, have marketing sit in on the supply chain meetings to learn about that, and vice versa. Have you seen anything like that implemented, or that any companies that you're working with are doing currently?
I actually have not seen anything that would like make you go, oh my goodness, that's such a good idea.
Mhm.
It really is as simple as what you just said, having a representative in those meetings or having an actual follow up and share out. So one thing that I have found, or two thoughts. The first thought actually is when you were saying, oh, we should, should they sit in on meetings, et cetera. Is that we talked with a VP of ops a couple of months ago, and I remember being on the call with him, and he said we really have to improve our cross-functional collaboration. And I know this is going to sound bad because everyone says that we're in meetings all the time, but we're obviously not in the right meetings,
Right.
or like we obviously need to be in more meetings because
Mhm.
I have no idea what you're doing on on the accounting side that is absolutely affected by whatever I tell my team to do from like an inventory perspective.
Mhm.
And it made sense. So the solution, at the time was okay, like, well, maybe we need to think about, having more meetings. But it's not necessarily, I think, having more meetings or having someone sit in on a meeting. When you have a small team and you're first starting, yeah, you can do that. You know what I mean? You can have people. When I say small, I'm thinking, 10 to 15 people,
Hmm.
because the number of, senior leaders, you're probably at, 3 or 4. Throw in the CEO, you're at 5. You can have that meeting
Mhm.
and not expect it to take hours and hours and hours of your week in order to make sure that that communication is happening. But as you grow, companies naturally grow into silos.
Right.
And
Mhm.
people know, like, we shouldn't be working in silos. Like, everyone knows it, but it's also very difficult. You have to be very, very cognizant of it. And
Mhm.
all of the leaders have to be on the same page. It can't be the VP of ops saying, oh, like, well, we're not doing good, with cross-functional collaboration. And then, like, the VP of finance is like, oh yeah, we're fine. Because there's no buy-in. Because now if he wants to have more meetings, the VP of finance is going to say no. You know what I mean? So there has to be this buy-in and an understanding of what it really does mean to plan in silos. And again, just going back to what I just said, everyone has to understand what happens downstream, because then if everyone understands the process, that communication is actually really easy. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that I sat in on the meeting, but you know enough about my role in this process
Mhm.
that you will at least send me the meeting minutes. You will at least communicate with me what happened in that meeting and be able to say, hey, this conversation came up and you probably should have been in it, but we're going to have a follow up next week. So I'll make sure it gets on your calendar. Or you can touch base with, Joe in whatever department to get more details about what you missed. It's something as simple of having the wherewithal to
Mhm.
know that that person was not in the room and that they should have been in the room.
Mhm.
That's just like your daily operational, execution, however you work tactically to make sure that the business runs. But then, of course, like I said, if it's not a S&OP process to where like it's a 4-week cycle and like week 1 you do this, week 2 you do this, like maybe you're not there yet from like a maturity perspective, but you do have some type of regular cadence where those cross-functional leads are in the room and they're saying, okay, this is what's happening in my world, and this is how I think it's going to affect all of your worlds as well. So I think that a lot of times when we're thinking about, oh, how do we, improve this, or how do we, make it happen? It's always some like, roadmapped, lofty idea. And like, that's true, because I also read the case study about Kimberly Clark, but you're not Kimberly Clark. Like, you're not
Right.
Nestle, you're not Coke. You don't need to do all of that. You don't need a 5-year roadmap to implement an S&OP process and $1 million, cloud-based tool that's going to keep all of your notes. Like, dude, take notes during the meeting and email them to everybody. Like, as simple as that. You would be surprised. Maybe you wouldn't. You would be surprised at how many like companies we go into, and one of the things that we're kind of grading in the back of our mind, and we don't always share it with everyone, but like meeting effectiveness. Like, are they sending out agendas? Are people actually prepping for the meeting? Is someone taking notes? Do those notes then get shared with everyone else? Do people actually read the notes that are shared out? So a lot of times, like, we sit in with companies and it's zero, like no on all of those. So like how we're talking right now, and it's like, okay, well, yeah, let's have a meeting about that. And then someone looks at calendars and says, oh, well, I'll throw it on the calendar for tomorrow morning. But if the people on the call don't have time to prep for that call, to be able to come with their ideas and to be able to come whole to that meeting, then like, sure, that time slot was open, but you're probably just going to do the same thing that you just did, because no one has had time to download, to debrief, and then to come to the next meeting with value add thoughts and value add ideas. So even just the idea of properly planning when these meetings happen, and then again, like I said, having an agenda so that if people do show up to the meeting and they're ready to go, that we're not derailed by someone going on a tangent, and we can parking lot it, because we remember that our agenda is that we needed to get this accomplished today. And if we allow you to derail us for 20 minutes, then we're not going to get there. So meeting effectiveness, it's not just about having a meeting and talking and sharing information, because maybe you don't need a meeting. Maybe you can just, share the information in some other way, but everyone has to be bought into actually reading it, or even being present in the meeting. I mean, how many times have you been meeting and someone's like doing something else? Oh, this is a fire and we have to fix. Does it really happen? Do you have to right now? Like, it can't wait 30 minutes. Because if it was really that much of a fire that you have to respond to it right now, then you should have said, hey guys, crazy world today. Tornado at the warehouse. We've got $2 million in inventory tied up. I can't make it to this meeting. Not, I'm going to sit in this meeting and waste everybody else's time and not actually even be present, because then we're just going to have this conversation again in 2 weeks. So having effective meetings is a cultural thing for the company.
Well, and I think a big part that you also talked about was silos. And if everyone is siloed off, they might not think that they're pertinent to the meeting in some way, shape, or form. Now, if someone is trying to break these silos, and let's say they are moving towards this thought process that supply chain is revenue generating, how would a leader start to really gather the team together? I guess, like, do you think they should put together a full, and I think we talked about this a few weeks ago on our introductory call, but I think you call it is it the product cycle, the product life cycle? Do you think they should actually just put together a timeline of the different touch points of the different teams within that product lifecycle, so everyone can understand, like, oh, this is sort of the supply chain and sourcing and production and shipping, and this is where the marketing ties into it, this is where the finance ties into it, and get everyone on the same page that way? Or how can they tie them all together?
Yeah, so when I talked about documenting and making sure that everyone understood that order to cash and procure to pay process, that is a conversation where everyone everybody isn't like not your entire company, but you know, the leaders, like at least those functional leads, because this is something that has to come from the top. It can't be like I work in sourcing and Lisa works in marketing and Francois works in you know, production, and we are a production planner, a demand planner, and like a marketing assistant, and we're going to get together and like talk about what's happening, because then our bosses are going to be like, why are you talking to Francois and Lisa every week? You know what I mean? Because they have to buy it. It has to be from the top, in that the leader, like you said, first of all, the leader of the organization understands the importance and makes it a priority for all of the functional leads to share in the development and documentation of that process. And when you're first starting out and we're talking about scaling, we're talking about growing, like that's a foundational element. So it's a lot harder, as you can imagine, once you've already grown into silos, to change that mindset to say, okay, I know this is what we've been doing, but now we're going to do it a different way. And it's not necessarily like Lisa doesn't want to come to the meeting thing. Lisa is a smart, intelligent person. She understands that this has to happen, but changing behavior is hard. Once you get used to doing something every day, the same way, all the time, it's not like I can't just, okay, Lisa, now on every Friday, this is what we're going to do. Like, cool. Yes, I'm on board, but it's also breaking the habit of what she was doing before. So even when you do get buy-in, I can say, oh yeah, you know, the leader needs to sit everybody, all the cross-functional, you know, leads together, and everyone walks through what the order to cash or procure to pay process is. Everyone puts in their 2 cents. Now we're all on the same page. We're going to share this information with our departments, and we're going to go out into the world and do great. It's like when you go to one of those conferences, like you hear a speech or something, and you're like really motivated for like a month, and all back to what you're doing before, because it's human behavior. It's natural. You know what I mean? You go back to what you're comfortable with. So it's not even just doing the piece of the design, you know, assuming that the process isn't already in place, you know, assuming that we're scaling up and we're hiring some new people. Let's get everyone together to design what the order to cash and procure to pay processes are going to look like. Let's get it out on a whiteboard. Let's then, because when we go through and we do process mapping, it's not just like, oh, step 1, step 2, step 3. It's exactly everything that you just said, Francois. It is, who is the supplier? Who is a supplier in the sense of like the supplier of this information, or you know, who is the person that does something before I do? What is the input? What is that information? And then what do I actually do with that? What is the output? And then who am I giving it to? And then we have these, and this was not my idea. So I won't take credit for it, but one of our directors came up with this really cool idea. So we have like on our process maps, there's like a little person icon, and it's like, who is it? You know what I mean? Like, or what is their role? And then we have like MDY, like, is it monthly? Is it daily? Is it yearly? Like, how often are things happening? And then how long does it take? So that's also like, if you're thinking about, okay, what's the lead time? It's easy to say, oh, if I have to tell my supplier 3 months in advance. Okay, that's the lead time for you to get the product from your supplier to like whatever the destination is. But what about everything else? So when you're documenting that process with everyone in the room, and marketing can say, oh, it takes us this long. And then sales can say, oh, our sale process is normally about however many ever months, how many ever weeks. Everyone's sales process is not the same. Everyone's sales cycle is not the same. And then production can say, oh, it takes us this long to make that widget. And sourcing can say it takes this key supplier this long to, you know, send wherever else. So when you have everyone in the room figuring out what that process is versus also what it should look like or could look like, then everyone, it's really eye-opening. And then from there, it's just a matter of going through the motions to make sure that it becomes the norm. which is easier when you're designing the process versus when you're having to change. And then it's a really long, painful process of reminding people that that's not how we do it anymore.
Yeah.
And from my experience working at a really good change management company and manufacturing warehousing, they were purchased by they were acquired by Accenture. Everywhere I go gets acquired. they're acquired by Accenture. But I remember like it was my first time going through like true change management of like really big teams and teams that have been doing the same thing for forever. And I remember like they told me, take a stab at coming up with this change management plan. And I think that it was a total of like 2 months or something. And they were like, yeah, it's going to take 2 months just for them to like actually understand why this is changing. These things take like 4 to 6 months minimum just for people to start doing the new process if they're being watched. If you stop watching them and you stop asking them for input, it's still very easy for them to go back to just like what they were doing before because it's comfortable. Change is really hard. And like just natural human people don't want to move. People don't want, uncertainty. They don't want to know. They don't want to not know what's going on. So it's easy for us to sit here and say, oh, like the leader needs to bring in everybody and talk about it and then implement a weekly meeting. Like, okay, cool. Like I can say that, but that, what does it actually mean when you're trying to change mindsets? It's easy, of course, like I said, if the process doesn't exist, if nothing happens now, if it's a one-man shop and they've got this e-commerce, store that's doing really, really well, they want to grow it, they can think about those kind of things. They can, bring on the right people and then everyone sits together to figure out what it looks like. But when you've already got a team of 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 and you're scaling up to the next level, if you've let your company grow into silos, it's going to take time. And you just have to know that it's going to take time. It's not a silver bullet. It's a months and months and months process, not a couple of weeks.
Yeah, definitely.
And how often, I know we're over the hour. I appreciate you. Yeah, I appreciate you staying on, DC. Just last question from me. How often should they be auditing this cross-functional, collaboration and just general processes?
That's a really good question, because what you may remember from your industrial engineering studies is that there is the idea of continuous improvement.
Right.
But when we learn about continuous improvement, from a textbook standpoint, it's like Toyota and GM, like it's manufactured as these huge companies that have like a whole continuous improvement department,
right.
And like their only job is to make sure that the company is optimizing and doing things the best way that they can. But there is, I hate to give like a consultant answer because like, it depends. There is no like tried and true, do it monthly, do it quarterly, do it weekly, because let's say you're like growing, like you're in hyper growth. You know what I mean? That quarterly might be too long. You might have to do it monthly. If you are, a small business and you're okay being a small business, you don't want because what comes along with growth, what some people might say are growing pains. Some people might just say they are headaches, and there is no positive connotation to it. I don't want it. So I don't want to have more than 10 or 15 people. Then you might just, do annually, maybe annually, especially just because technology changes so much. Like, are our processes in our technology, every year, let's look at them as we're starting to do our strategic planning for the next year. Is there anything, resource wise, anything technology wise, anything process wise that we should be changing, that we should look at? But in a perfect world, there is absolutely not even a perfect world, in a best practice, or it doesn't have to be perfect. You should be doing some type of continuous improvement, even if it's not Toyota ongoing all the time level. You should not you should not have someone like me come in and I ask you where when were your processes last documented, and you say like 5 years ago. Like, or I say like, oh, like, hey, here's a process, you know what I mean? When was this last updated? Oh, I don't even think that we've looked at that since the last consultants came in 2 years ago. I was like, well, what was the point of paying the consultants? Because like one of the things that we do is that when we document these processes, ideally the customer will have the bandwidth and will have someone in-house that can do a lot of the legwork. But if they don't, and we actually end up documenting the process, we leave them with the not PDF version, the editable version of whatever, program it is, Visio or Lucidchart or whatever, because we encourage that depending on the pace of the business, they'll look at this again in 6 months, or they'll look at this again in a year. If someone tells me they're looking to double their business in a year, you need to be looking at this minimum every quarter. Like these processes, like you have, because you're hiring people that much quicker. You're expanding your partner network. You're probably looking at 3PLs. You're probably looking at, other co-manufacturers. You're probably looking at distribution partnerships. And if you're going to double your business in a year, you have to be looking at this stuff regularly, because also as you bring on new partners, as you invest in new technology, they have to understand what your business process is. So if your business process is outdated, how can they truly even make a recommendation that is considerate of your particular business? Not to say like, oh yeah, we do this for tons of CPG companies. All CPG companies are not created equal. So in order for me to be able to tell you how, like as a salesperson, if I'm a good salesperson, how our technology, how our fulfillment center, how our business model fits or doesn't fit with your business model, your processes you have to be able to communicate what your process is to me. And if you're growing that quickly, then you should be reevaluating, plan, do, check, act. Thanks, industrial engineering. Another, plan, do, check, act. You should be making sure that, okay, when we first designed and documented this process, we didn't need a fulfillment partner. But now that we do, where do we ideally think this fulfillment partner will fit in? Because then that drives our conversations with the fulfillment partners for us to choose one. It drives the conversation with any co-manufacturers. Like, okay, this was our process before we had a co-manufacturer, but now we need one. We need to reevaluate this process. This was our process before we had an ERP and we were using QuickBooks, but now we want to get an ERP. So we have to know, like, how is finance, accounting, and like how are orders, how is all of that going to be connected now that we have this new system? And that's not always something that you can do in-house, that requires a level in itself of expertise, of really understanding fulfillment and really understanding the ERP space and really understanding 3PLs. So in that case, that is when I would say CEO, be the visionary, VP of ops, COO, whoever, run the day-to-day, definitely have a point of view and a perspective, but let an expert make a recommendation, or at least have the conversations. Because I know, like, for example, when I was like looking for HR benefits and trying to understand HR, like I talked to a couple of different companies, like they literally all said the same thing. And there was no way for me, not knowing anything about HR and benefits and knowing what a company of my size really needs, there was no way for me to be able to truly make a decision and it would have strictly been based on price. It would have ended up being based off of whoever was gonna, charge me the least amount of money, because everyone said the exact same thing. Everyone knows like the same keywords. It's the same with everything else. In every industry, like people know what the marketing team knows what the keywords are. They're doing the keyword searches, you know, to see what people are talking about so they can throw it into their marketing material. The salespeople are using it. And it takes someone who understands that part of the business to be able to truly ask the right questions. Because if you don't ask the right question, you're not going to get the answer you're looking for.
Right.
And I didn't know what those questions were. So I hired someone who knows HR and who knows benefits. And that's what you have to do when you're doing, again, fulfillment, sourcing, technology, whatever these different pieces are. You, as a business leader, have to not let your ego get in the way of, like, you don't know everything. And it's okay to not know everything because there's a lot to know. But there are specialists. So lean on those specialists. Like everyone has something they're good at. Everyone has something they like. And if you are not good at it, you don't like it, then lean on someone who is.
Right.
Exactly. Well, and for anybody who does need help with their supply chain and is not good at it, needs somebody who is, where can they find more information about you and about your business?
So I'm going to cringe and send people to that. Oh, you're putting it up there. Yeah. So that's our website. It is a work in progress.
Gotcha.
But I mean, contact information is there. That's our website. You can also contact me directly on LinkedIn. I don't want to say I'm always on LinkedIn, but I'll definitely get back to you. Or just email me, dc@nugenttarchitects.com. Really easy. Just my first name at our URL.
Perfect. And as always, that'll be linked in the description of the video and the audio experience. DC, thank you so much for spending time with us today. And hopefully we'll be able to see you when you're in Atlanta.
Yes, hopefully. I'm still the Atlanta piece is the only thing that's up in the air from like a date perspective, because we have some client on-sites that may or may not be scheduled around that same time. So I might have to move some of the Atlanta. But I mean, at some point we'll be back. We actually have stuff in storage because we moved from during the pandemic. We did Atlanta to LA to Las Cruces, and now we're back to our list of okay, where to now?
You're a nomad.
So we have some stuff in storage in Atlanta, and our realtor was like, "Why are you gonna come get this if you don't know where it's actually gonna go?" So if nothing else, at some point I have to.
We'll get it hashed out.
So regardless of when that happens, we'll definitely connect.
It'll definitely happen. Well, thank you again so much. And thank you for everybody who tuned in today. If you liked what you heard, please give us a like, comment with your thoughts, share with your friends, subscribe to the show, and be sure to turn on that bell so that you activate the notifications and never miss a conversation with leaders in supply chain like DC with New Gen Architects. And we'll see everybody on the next one.